My name is Kyung-wha Kang. I'm president of Asia Society, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you and join us today for the inaugural Baifang Schell Book Prize awarding ceremony. This is new. This new annual award at Asia Society celebrates exceptional book-length works published in English on or from China and the greater Sinophone world. And there are two prize categories for nonfiction and for translated literature. Overall, the award seeks to recognize and provide excellence in books that deepen understanding of the complexities of the region through original reporting, incisive analysis, compelling narrative, and literary merit. The Baifang Schell Book Prize is administered by China Books Review, which is a digital magazine published by Asia Society in partnership with the Wire China, which was founded in October 2023. The prize was named in honor of Liu Baifang Schell, the late wife of our colleague Orville Schell, who is Arthur Ross Vice President of the Center on U.S.-China Relations here at Asia Society. We're very grateful to everyone who has supported and worked on this new award as part of our broader work to bridge cultural divides and facilitate the spread of ideas and knowledge across borders and languages. We very much hope that in honoring these books, we contribute to a deeper mutual understanding between the English-speaking and Chinese-speaking worlds. I very much look forward to today's conversations with the winning authors. And before we turn to the program itself, let me first introduce David Barboza, co-founder of China Book Review and the Wire China, to offer a brief tribute to Baifang Schell. David.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Dave Barboza, the publisher of the Wire China, and also the co-sponsor of the China Books Review with Asia Society. Obviously, we're here tonight to honor the winners of the inaugural Baifang Schell Book Prize. But we should also pay tribute to a remarkable woman who we've named this prize after, Liu Baifang Schell. Baifang devoted her life to building bridges. She was born in Beijing. She suffered through the Cultural Revolution in Henan province, I believe. She then moved to the US, studied at Berkeley, became sort of a bridge builder and exchange, cultural exchange, entrepreneur almost. And she brought NBC News, Jane Pauley, to Beijing, I think in the 80s, 86. She worked with Frontline's documentary crew. She also worked with Sidney Rittenberg and George Soros. Orville Schell, as we've been told, was married to Baifang. She's also the mother of Sasha and Sebastian Schell. She passed away tragically in 2021, so we thought we would provide this short photographic tribute to her life. So a little applause for. Okay, so now we're going to welcome the editor of the China Books Review, Alec Ash, to take over the ceremonies. Alec?
Thank you so much, David, for that very moving tribute to Baifang Schell. I met Baifang a few times, both in China and California. I didn't know her very well, but my impression was of someone who had the rare skill to make everyone feel welcome, no matter their age or status or where they came from. It's an ability which we'd like to honor the spirit of in welcoming you all today to this prize in her honor. There are a few people I want to acknowledge first before we get into the program itself. Two in particular. The first is David Barboza, who, as you heard, and as many of you know, was a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter in China for many years before, with his wife Lin, founding a mini media empire of his own. Without David's unflinching encouragement and advice, none of this would have happened. And secondly, of course, Orville Schell, whose contributions to the field of China studies, US-China relations, span many decades, over 10 books, and I think many of us would agree that many writings, scholarships, and initiatives are all balancing on Orville's shoulders. I'd also like to extend thanks to those who have supported China Books Review and the work of the US-China Center over the years: Janet Ross, Lenny Bernardo, Lu Han, Clifford Ross for his work on the Coal and Ice Project, and many other people, some of you in the room. My personal thanks also to those who have helped work on the review since its launch, in a special Tylee Ni, Jeffrey Sequeira, Alexander Boyd, and Claudia Klink. China Books Review launched in October 2023. Many of you were here for that launch downstairs. The idea was to create a space to expand the conversation around Greater China, telling readers about books and ideas that they might not have heard of, adding color and filling in the detail to a Chinese landscape painting, if you will, that often is painted with black and white broad strokes. Since then, we've also started a podcast. We host regular book talk events here. We, this year, started a book club. And on all of your seats, you should have the very first edition of our print yearbook, hot off the presses. So we invite you to flip through. A book prize is something that we wanted to do from the very beginning. We're very grateful to have been given the opportunity to administer this. There's two reasons that we think this work is important. The first is to bring attention to existing work, rewarding it, but also helping books find new readers, extending the shelf life of books and the ideas and research and stories in them, not just of the winners, but of all of the shortlisted titles. And the second reason is to encourage future work. Many of us know it's a long and lonely slog to write and translate books, so we hoped to incentivize that work at a time when we need nuance, expertise, and human stories more than ever. There are two categories that we wanted to honor. The first is nonfiction books, both trade and academic, about Greater China, and the second is translated literature from the Sinophone world. Both have a broad remit, not just the People's Republic of China, but the Republic of China, Taiwan, the Chinese diaspora from Malaysia to Minnesota. Each award we're giving today is for books published in English in the calendar year 2024. We have a listings project where we count all the number of books broadly around this topic. We counted over 500 in that year. So our two independent juries did real Staccanovite work, Staccanovite work, or Leifeng spirit would be more appropriate, in sifting through the pile to come up with our winners. So let's get to the winners and the awards. We're going to honor each book sequentially with a mini panel of the winning author or translator in conversation with a jury member, talking for about 15 minutes, with an opportunity for just a few audience questions. The first award is the 2024 award for Outstanding Nonfiction Book on China or the Sinophone World. We had a stellar jury for this award, chaired by Andrew Nathan, also including Yangyang Cheng, Barbara Demick, Isabel Hilton, and Jeffrey Wasserstrom. The winner that they elected is, of course, Edward Wong for his book At the Edge of Empire, A Family's Reckoning with China, published by Viking in June 2024. This is a reported family memoir that spans many decades. You'll hear more about it in just a second. The jury commented that it was, quote, a book that expertly weaves together the experiences of Edward Wong's father as a soldier in Mao's army and a political victim, with the story of major events in China, Hong Kong, and US-China relations since the early 1950s. The jury also awarded honorable mentions to The Chinese Computer, A Global History of the Information Age by Thomas S. Malani, which the jury called, quote, a gripping technology detective story written with verve and subtle humor, and to Private Revolutions, 4 Women Face China's New Social Order by Yuan Yang, which they commended for its intimate and deeply reported portraits of 4 young Chinese women. Also shortlisted were Chop Fry Watch Learn by Michelle T. King and The Sentinel State by Pei Mingxin. There are full info and blurbs for all of these books at China Books Review. So let's get back to the winners. In just a second, I'm going to welcome the first panel to the stage. Of course, our winning author, Edward Wong, who is an award-winning journalist, formerly New York Times Beijing bureau chief, and now its diplomatic correspondent based in DC. He will be in conversation with Andrew J. Nathan, our jury chair, professor of political science at Columbia University, and author of many books on China himself. As they come up to the stage, I would first like to invite Ed to receive his award from Andy. We'll have a brief photo opportunity. And as we do that, I'll invite everyone to join me in congratulating Ed and his book.
Does it work? It does. Yeah, so the jury thought this was a wonderful book. We really congratulate you. We have a very short time for questions, so I'm just going to go right to a structural question about the book. As Alex said, it's interweaving the story of Ed's father with his reporting journey and things that he saw. So there's a subtle structure of the book. But what struck me remarkable was how much information you got from your father. As a father myself, I don't give that much. Nobody asked me for that much. And even your Uncle Sam, your father's brother, seemed to have kept all of your father's letters. So maybe you tell us a little bit of, that's a reporting job, maybe the hardest one in the world.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks to you and to the jury. I'm honored. And before I dive into the answer, I just want to say, of course, thank you to Orville and to Baifang. I met both of them in the mid-'90s when I started graduate school at Berkeley, and Orville had just come on as dean. And that was the start of my engagement with China. And over the years, I met up with Orville and Baifang, both in Berkeley and in Beijing. So I'm honored that this award is in their memory, and I would just want to say thanks. And we came full circle because I taught Sasha in a class at Berkeley a couple years ago. So, and thank you to everyone who was involved in the book, which includes many people in this room, the reporters like David, Alec, Barbara, who were all in Beijing at the same time as me, and many others, as well as Wendy, Allison, and Adam from Viking and from the Cheney Agency who made this possible. So thank you. And you know, the answer to your question starts off in the mid-'90s when I was going to Berkeley, because when I was growing up in the suburbs of Washington, I wasn't that interested in China intellectually. And it wasn't until I was a grad student at Berkeley and was studying Mandarin and studying Chinese history and politics and learning from Orville and others that I became much more interested in the history of China. And so I would go back home on breaks. I actually decided to sit my parents down and do formal interviews with them just to start recording in the manner of oral history what they had been through in China. And that was when I learned that my father had been in the PLA. I had no idea that he had been in the Chinese army before that. And he told me about it. He showed me a few photographs, including the one that is on the cover of the book of him in a PLA uniform. And I did a short video documentary project in one of my years at Berkeley based on that. But then towards the end of my time in China for the New York Times, I decided I wanted to write a book and decided that my father's journey in the PRC would be a central narrative in that book. And so once I moved back to Washington in 2018 and I had the concrete intention of starting this project, I sat my father down again and did very long interviews with him in my childhood home, recorded all of those. And I would go back to him over and over on certain episodes that he had recalled when we talked decades earlier in the house. And then I wanted to sort of get out of him both the concrete details of what he experienced out in Dongbei or the Northeast when he was trying to train to fight the Americans on the Korean Peninsula, or, for example, when he was in these various postings in Xinjiang in the far Northwest. I wanted the concrete details of daily life, the way he interacted with, say, the Uyghur Muslim soldiers or Kazakh Muslim soldiers that he was working with. I wanted to understand the emotional resonance and the emotional fallout for him when he, was barred from joining the party eventually after he had left the army. And so I needed to go back to all of those over and over again. And at times he got very annoyed with me. He would say, "Why are you asking me about this one day again?" And it's because, and I wasn't sure, I think all of us who ask questions of our parents or even of our siblings or others, we wonder whether their memories are accurate depictions of what they had lived through. And it was later in the research process when I got these letters that my father had written to his older brother,
Sam. Kept all the letters?
Yeah, he kept all the letters and he handed them to me. And what was interesting was that when I read through the letters, and I did it with the help of a great professor at Duke who was very generous in helping me translate them, because it's very hard for me to read the handwritten Chinese that my father had written. And so after Eileen translated these, I read through them, and I discovered that actually many of my father's memories, the ones he was telling me, were very aligned very closely with what he was writing to Sam in those years. So the letters were very helpful. The interviews were important, and then Sam, of course, had written a family memoir about the time that they grew up together in Hong Kong and in Guangdong during the Japanese occupation and during the Chinese Civil War. And that was, he self-published that, gave it around to family members, and that was also an important part of the research for the book.
Chapters on your father are very, very concrete. The weather, what he ate, and all those kinds of things. So it's amazing. So your father spent quite a bit of time in Xinjiang, as you just alluded to. And the title of the book, At the Edge of Empire, is about a lot of it. And also in your reporting, you also went to Xinjiang and Tibet. And so one of the themes that I drew from the book is about the efforts of the empire. Well, you say this quite explicitly, that the China of today is the old empire. And it's controlling a lot of territory that's not part of the heartland of China, and that control is a struggle. So that leads me to want to ask whether you think that Xi Jinping has control over the edges. The edges are not just lines around the empire. They are huge amounts of territory. That problem of controlling the periphery, where are we with that? Do they have control? Will they ever get control? So this is, of course, a prediction question, but
right, which we avoid. We journalists avoid that, and you historians avoid that too. But
we got to be paid extra, then we do it.
right. Yeah, we could make a lot of great bets if we
You
knew
got a
where it was
book
going.
prize, so you got to do it.
So, I mean, I would say, so in concrete terms, I would say that right now under Xi Jinping, the Chinese government and the party and the security state do exercise fairly rigorous control over these areas. And I think that that's been, and they've been, obviously implementing certain policies through the years that we've all witnessed, reported on, documented, including the internment camps in Xinjiang, various forms of policing in Tibet, taking Tibetan or Uyghur children, putting them in boarding schools in other parts of China, having them learn Mandarin as the primary language rather than their native language. I think these are all forms of, what Xi Jinping has said publicly and in private party speeches as like the drive for assimilation. And I think that that's the biggest, probably if you had to define his method of trying to control these areas, it would be through that word assimilation. And I think that there is a coercive element to that, obviously, because I think that, the forceful nature of taking some of these people who live in those areas of China and then moving them to Han majority areas in order to force them into a majority Han culture mainstream is very coercive. And also, of course, there's also a coercive security state that's been put in place both in Tibet and Xinjiang. And when we talk about the frontiers or the peripheries or the edge of empire, we also have to talk about places like Guangdong and Hong Kong. And that's part of the argument I make in the book is that, these other areas, the areas where my family comes from, are as much these borderlands of China as the Northwest or Tibet or the Tibetan Plateau. And I think we've seen what Xi has done in Hong Kong, in 2014, in 2019 as well. And it seems that these areas are, for better or worse, at least for the time being, under fairly tight control of the state. But as we've seen in other empires, including the Soviet Union, we don't know how cohesive that control is, and we can be surprised when those areas decide that they want greater autonomy or greater independence. And we don't necessarily see the fissures or the cracks right now, but they could very well be there.
Yeah, and I guess Taiwan is another piece of that periphery of the traditional empire.
Right. At least it's an area that the Qing had controlled part of at one time, and that in the Chinese, in the imagination of the party currently and the state, they see that as a necessary part of the empire to bring back, as well as unfinished business from the Chinese Civil War.
Some empires, once they expand to a certain place, they don't stop.
Right. And I think China, in the book, I say that America has been an empire for decades now. And I saw it that at its most, in its most concrete nature when I reported on Iraq. But I also think that America has built an empire through other means, through the role that the dollar plays in the world economy, through America's place in multilateral institutions around the world, and through the string of military bases that it has placed around the globe. And I think that China has looked at what America has done in the post-World War II years, and it wants to replicate the type of imperial power that America became, using many of the same means that the United States did.
You're predicting. Very good.
Well, it's not predictive because I think they're on this course right now. They're doing it.
Yeah. Okay. Then you quote your father as saying the Kuomintang was unable to control China, but only the communists can control China. So this is a question about political control in heartland China over the Han people. Do you think that because we're always puzzling over is it about to erupt? The post-COVID, the late COVID crackdown demonstration, things like that. Is there a bubbling pot underneath, or is the system pretty stable?
I personally think that over many years, people have often looked at signs of protests in China and wondered whether there was like a mass uprising about to take place, and I never sensed that. Personally, when I was living in China, I have to say that the white paper protests did surprise me during the zero COVID policy, And I think it surprised many other China watchers, especially ones who had left China a few years earlier. And it did surprise me because I don't think I had ever expected, at least in this period, that you would have these mass protests in some of the large cities around China. Of course, I wasn't there to experience how coercive the zero COVID policy was. And then once I returned to China for a visit in 2023 and started talking to Chinese friends and other people there, then I realized like how traumatized some people were in these cities by the zero COVID policy. So there is a boiling point, and people can't take to the streets. I don't know, I can't tell, I'm not in China, and I don't feel it's my place to say whether or not there is a sense of mass disapproval or unrest right now, and I really don't have the evidence for that. But I also look at the white paper protests, and I look at what Xi Jinping did, and it also makes me think again of the adaptive nature of the Communist Party and its leaders, because I think what was interesting was leading up to the white paper protests, many analysts outside of China have been looking at China, writing about the zero COVID policy and saying, oh, this is a very personal policy of Xi's, and it'll be a long time before he decides to change this policy. But I think that when he saw the economy starting to slow dramatically because of partly because of the zero COVID policies, and then also when the protests started to erupt in late 2022, then I think he then did a 180 and got rid of the zero COVID policy and went in the exact opposite direction, telling the people that, oh, COVID, it's fine to catch COVID. It's not a serious disease. And of course, we know many people died. Right.
I think we all die sometime. I heard that recently.
Right. Yeah. Right. There's China's changing the way America thinks. So I think that it also shows how adaptable the party can be, that they can look at circumstances on the ground and say, we have to change the policy. And so I see that as evidence that the party can somehow, when they see unrest or see energies directed against them, they can change the course also.
How are we on time? Okay. I want to ask one more, then I want to recognize a couple of questions from those of you who are listening. And my one more thing is not about the book, but it's about Ed as a wonderful diplomatic correspondent in Washington from whom we all learned so much. And that is, does Trump have a China policy? As far as I could tell, Trump himself, he's surrounded by people who have a China policy, but it ain't over till the fat lady sings. And has he said anything? Has he given any hint? Does he have a view? Is he going to attack? Is he going to surrender? I mean, he's so puzzling.
Well, if you looked at your 401k plan, you know that he has some policy towards China, which
I'm afraid to look.
Right. But I mean, obviously, Trump is focused on the trade relationship between U.S. and China. And I think that Trump doesn't think of China and policy on China in this holistic manner that people who, at CFR who write for Foreign Affairs or who have been in previous administrations might think about U.S.-China policy. Like what he does is he has obsessed for decades over, I think, the imbalance in the trade relationship and the trade deficit. And he thinks that his tariff policy will help rebalance that and also will help bring some level of manufacturing jobs back to America. And he is partly encouraged in this by people like Peter Navarro, who are in the White House and are physically very close to him and have his ear to a certain degree. So I think that when he looks at China, he sees it as this predatory trade power, but he also admires it. He talks in admiring terms about Xi Jinping, and he says that if he were in the shoes of the party leaders, he would have done the same thing. He would have taken advantage of the same rules or broken the same rules in order to expand its trade position around the world and with America. So I think that's almost Trump's sole focus when it comes to China, and other people around him, including the State Department, in the Pentagon, in what's left of the NSC, have different views on China, and they think more about things like the military relationship or the military competition with China. But I don't, from my perspective, Trump doesn't think very much about that.
Okay, can we have a couple questions from folks? Orville? Yes, Ian.
I grew up speaking Cantonese mainly in my household, and I spoke some English and some I speak Cantonese and English with my father and my mother. And I didn't learn Mandarin until I went to Beijing to study it in 1996 and then kept studying it afterwards. My father, by the way, is from Taishan County or Toisan or Hoisan in Guangdong, and his first household language is Toishan. It's Toisanese.
If there's no more questions, we can yield to the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Andy. We now move from the empire itself to an island that two empires have tried to dominate, and from the havens of nonfiction to the imagined worlds of fiction, with our second award. This is the 2024 Award for Outstanding Translated Literature from Chinese Language. Our jury for this award, equally talented and exemplary, were chaired by Eric Abrahamson, also with Xiaolu Guo, Nikki Harmon, Ha Jin, and Perry Link. The winning book, of course, is Yáng Shuāng-zǐ's Taiwan Travelogue, a novel translated by Lin King, published by Grey Wolf Press in November 2024, originally Taiwan Travelogue, published in 2021. The jury called this book, quote, a masterful novel that combines sly literary conceit with the lush pleasures of food writing, upended by a deepening experience of colonialism and its effects on friendship and love. So we're going to hear more about that in just a second. We'd also like to recognize the honorable mentions for this award. Another book from Taiwan, Feng Siqi's First Love Paradise by Lin Han, translated by Jenna Tang, which the jury praised for its courageous portrayal of the mind of the victim in sexual predation. And Mourning Abreast, autofiction by Xixi from Hong Kong, translated by Jennifer Feely, which was commended as, quote, a pioneering work of autobiographical fiction about the body and disease. Shortlisted also Delicious Hunger by Hai Fan, translated by Jeremy Tiang, and The Conal and the Eunuch by Mai Jia, translated by Dylan Levy King. Full blurbs of all of these books at China Books Review, and we do encourage you to read and buy all of the shortlisted titles. The winning author, Yáng Shuāng-zǐ, is in Taiwan and unable to come over. In just a second, we're going to welcome the translator, Lin King, up to the stage. But first, we have a video address, which Yáng Shuāng-zǐ was kindly enough to record for us.
大家好，我是杨双子。非常感谢夏白方图书奖将第一届的翻译文学奖颁给了台湾漫游录。当我知道夏白方图书奖创立的目的是想要表扬一些著作，有助于国际社会理解华语世界，我特别觉得荣幸。原来台湾漫游录做得到这件事。我想谈谈台湾漫游录，最初为什么想要写这部作品。很大的原因是因为我想要对台湾人，以及华语世界的人们，甚至是日本人，说明一下台湾曾经历经过日本殖民，经过日本殖民以及在2次大战之后，台湾这块土地上政权的更迭，对台湾这块土地上的人民，对台湾这块土地本身造成什么影响。那我希望用一些更轻快活泼的方式来写这样的作品，来谈殖民政权以及在殖民政权离开之后，迎接新的殖民政权，台湾人做了什么样的选择？台湾人的内心历经什么样的心路历程？ 所谓变得轻松呢，就是我希望用美食、用铁道、用两个女孩子之间的同性情谊来书写这部作品。更具体的说，我想要透过文学方式表现台湾，并不是只有半导体，也不是只有珍珠奶茶。本次获得这个奖，我要再次感谢这部作品的翻译者金玲，也要特别感谢Grey Wolf 出版社，感谢这本书的中文原作的春山出版社，也特别感谢所有的读者朋友。我非常希望大家阅读了《台湾漫游录》之后，可以真正的起心动念来到台湾，来一趟自己的台湾漫游录。谢谢大家。
Wonderful. So let me introduce our second panel. We're delighted to be joined by the translator of the book, Lin King. Lin King is a Taiwanese and American writer and translator, currently based in Taipei. Her other work includes the graphic memoir, The Boy from Clearwater, and she translates between Chinese, Japanese, and English. She will be in conversation with Yangyang Cheng, research scholar at the Paul Tsai China Center at Yale University, and one of our jury members, albeit for the nonfiction prize, representing the fiction jury. Please join me to congratulate Lin and by proxy Yáng Shuāng-zǐ as she receives her award.
Wow. So I should say that I read Taiwan Travelogue in its Chinese original first, which I bought from Jifeng Bookstore, and a shout out to Yu Miao in the audience here, before I read the English translation, which is really a masterful work. So congratulations again. And it will be an understatement to say that I savored every single page in both versions. And one of the things that I noted from the Chinese original is that even though it is written in Mandarin Chinese, but it contains elements from different languages, including Japanese, including Hakka and Hokkien, different Taiwanese languages and indigenous languages. And even when some of these, the written script may be shared, but they contain different sounds, different histories, different logic and rhythm. And so as a translator, how do you render such a rich linguistic landscape into English without flattening it?
Oh gosh, by demanding a lot of the reader. So anyone who has read the English edition, thank you for your hard work. I was actually reading Ed's, if I can call you that, Ed's note to his book about romanization and spelling for translation from the greater Chinese region. And I faced a lot of the same issues and really appreciate the way that you clarified and spelled these things, because that was such a major point of contention for Taiwan Travelogue, which, as you heard, is set during the Japanese colonial era, specifically 1936. And at that time in Taiwan, people spoke largely Taiwanese Hokkien and Japanese. And of course, Hakka and the indigenous languages were also prevalent, but what we call Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, was not. And I actually was just having a conversation with the Asia Society Museum curator Kelly Ma about this. But she was asking, why do they call it translated from Mandarin Chinese? And I said, oh, gosh, how do we explain? Because in English, there's no good word, there's no good translation for it, and it's so complex. I mean, some folks in Taiwan nowadays call it just like 方块文字, just square characters. That's all we have to define it. So that's, yeah, I think it was really complicated, and I was encouraged actually by, I'll just do my spiel here, but I was in a very academic environment when I was writing this. I was working at Columbia University, the Weatherhead East Asian Institute with Andy. And before that, I was working for the artist He Guoqiang, who's born in China, works a lot in Japan, and based in New York. And actually, eaten with Orville and Baifang there several times. You will not remember me as a 23-year-old, but I was kind of informed by these spaces to know that there are people out there who are willing to, for the sake of authenticity of experience, sacrifice some of their own comfort in reading the English language, reading a so-called book in English. So in following that, and because Grey Wolf was so generous with trusting me, we did the book essentially in multiple sets of romanizations. So there's a lot of Taiwanese in there, there's a lot of Japanese in there, and there's actually not that much Han Chinese in there. And there's a map in the beginning, it's trilingual. The characters' names and the place names appear in multiple pronunciations, which is actually something that the readers of the original text weren't taxed with, because in Hanzi, in kanji, it's all the same, and we get it. But in English, all we have are how we say it. And so I ended up saying in many ways, and however much people got away from it, I hope they understood it. I hope they understood what happened to the main characters, even if they were using different names.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing part of your process with us. And I think one of the things the book really exemplifies is that how language can bridge time, locations, and cultures, but it can also accentuate unequal relations of power. And one of the central things in this book is this relationship between two women, the Japanese travel writer and her Taiwanese assistant and interpreter. And there is this yearning for friendship from the Taiwanese writer towards her, from the Japanese writer towards her Taiwanese assistant. However, there is some pushback from her Taiwanese assistant with subtle or unsubtle mentions of their unequal power relations, not just in terms of employer and employee, but also in terms of this broader colonial dynamic. And the question of whether or not two people occupying very different positions in relations of power can become true friends is a complicated question that the book does not directly answer. And one might say that depending on who is asking the question, who is answering the question, at what time, the answers also differ. Can you unpack some of that nuance in the book with us?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge to a lot of, as it was originally written, to a lot of contemporary Taiwanese readers who, one, maybe don't think about the ethnic racial dynamics in Taiwan much anymore, in the sense that, since the Chinese Civil War, we all speak Mandarin as our common language, and maybe these differences are not so immediately apparent, especially because so many families have mixed ethnicities. But it's kind of to remind people what it used to be like, and not in the not so distant past, how complex that layering has been racially, in terms of power structures, in terms of language, in terms of cuisine, in terms of infrastructure, which even now a lot of people who come to Taipei say it's like, oh, it's like kind of like a messier Tokyo. And you say like, yeah, they kind of planned it, so it's kind of how it ended up. And it's just kind of, the book is to remind Taiwanese people of these layers in our history, in our modern history, and to kind of draw awareness to how nothing is quite as it seems, and you might be living in these contexts and not know the forces that are acting on you. And I think their friendship, or whatever they define it as, is a testament to just how you can never know fully what the other person has experienced and why they think of you in the way that they do, and why they're communicating with you in the way that they do. And as I guess the world becomes more intermixed and, well, I don't know about now, but theoretically we were in this period with higher mobility and cultural exchange. And it's kind of helpful for people to think about that, I think, in Taiwan, where it can feel really homogenous, but there are a lot of migrant workers, there are a lot of people who are arriving from all walks of life. And I think sometimes the community can feel closed off, and it's helpful to think about how at one point we were also all foreigners. Well, most of us were foreigners to this land, and in fact, sometimes Han people can be seen as colonizers of Taiwan as well.
Yeah, and one of the things the book reminded me of, actually, since Ed and Andy, your panel discussed Xinjiang, is the American anthropologist Darren Byler's book, Terror Capitalism, about the contemporary ethnic oppression in Xinjiang. And one of the things that a concept he raised is called anti-colonial friendships, which can happen between young Uyghur men, which can happen between Uyghur men and Han Chinese settlers, which can also happen between the Uyghur men and the American anthropologists who document their plight. And of course, some of these concepts are also in tension. But there is one idea was like these genuine individual relationships can also be a way to contest and resist structural relations of power and injustice. And so on that note, I want to bring in another dimension of power dynamic in this book, which is patriarchy. These are two East Asian women who both live under patriarchy, who are both very aware of patriarchal dynamics. And one of the things that I found really interesting was this Japanese writer who is very aware of patriarchy and in some ways tries to protect her Taiwanese assistant from some of these patriarchal contentions using her relative relation of power from the metropole. And so my question for you is, do you think for the Japanese writer, did her understanding of being a woman under patriarchy help her better understand the colonial dynamic or made her more oblivious to it?
I think I err on the latter, but I've been told that I'm quite hard on her. And that people like this character a lot. And
I didn't like her.
Oh, thank you. Just kind of cocky. But yeah, I think it's more so the latter than the former in the sense that she's kind of using her racial advantage to bully these Taiwanese and like lower ranked Japanese men to stop abusing this woman because she happens to find this woman kind of better than all of them. And there's a weird, I remember with my Grey Wolf editor, Yuka Igarashi, there was this one chapter where I emailed her and was like, yeah, it's this weird thing where she kind of like dresses up the Taiwanese woman like as a doll and is objectifying her like, oh, you look so pretty in the kimono, you look so pretty in the Western dress, and she doesn't see how patriarchal that is. And there's sort of having queer undertones that there's sort of this male gaze element that she applies as the taller, more established, more hot-headed party of their relationship. And I think in that sense, because she self-identifies as this feminist and this feminist icon, it blinds her to a lot of what she's doing because she kind of assumes that she's on the side of virtue, which I think is a lesson that we can all take away. Yeah, when you feel like you are the more enlightened party, I identify as XYZ and therefore I can do no wrong, right? I'm aware of the problems, but there are obviously a lot of problems that she was not aware of and that impeded their friendship.
Yeah, because like the colonial state is also a patriarchal state, and women can also reproduce these unequal relations of power. And earlier we mentioned that one of the shortlisted books from the nonfiction prize is Michelle T. King's Chop, Fry, Watch, Learn, which is a biography of Fu Peimei, who was a Manchurian-born and Taiwanese a chef and TV chef, and who has been called by the New York Times as the Julia Child of the Republic of China, even though her TV cook show actually predates Julia Child's. And one of the interesting dynamics here is this is for people who do not know, Taiwan Travelogue features food a lot, so do not read it on an empty stomach or have a lot of snacks nearby. But one of the things was also how food in Fu Peimei cookshow was also being used for propaganda by the Kuomintang government under martial law, partly to soften its militaristic image, but also partly to present itself as this vanguard and the guardian, the true representative of Chinese culture and tradition as manifested in its culinary richness. And so I'm curious, of course, later on, after the height of Fu Peimei's career with Taiwan's contemporary transitions, the process of after martial law was lifted, the process of democratization is also a process of decolonization. And how much of the, let's say, how much of Taiwan's colonial past under Japanese colonial rule resonates in the present, and how much of Taiwan's present conditions was on your mind when you were rendering this text, technically set in the late 1930s, to a contemporary audience?
It's a lot. Shuāng-zǐ is very vocal about her politics, believes in Taiwanese independence, has spoken about it very openly, and is involved in political activism. And I, of course, knew that about her going in. And I know that she's writing even her fiction toward at least diversifying people's views on this subject, on what Taiwanese identity is, on why it is distinct from, say, Chinese identity or Japanese identity, that it's multifaceted, it is not one thing, and by virtue of not being one thing or the other, it is a thing of its own. And so I think throughout the book, we're very, very careful. I don't think you're going to find the term like Chinese food. I hope not in the book. But I was thinking about the Fu Peimei book because you had mentioned it in our correspondence, and I was looking at, was it a New York Times review of it that it was like, oh, the Julia child of modern Chinese cooking from Taiwan, or something of that sort. And I just knew that would tick off Shuāng-zǐ so much because we're, I think, at a stage in Taiwanese identity where most young people, certainly of my generation, have never lived under Kuomintang martial law. We have never been told growing up that you're Chinese and should identify as such. I think if you ask people off the street, they would say I'm Taiwanese. And at this stage, how would we define ourselves when so much of how the rest of the world sees us is, Chinese literature, Chinese cooking, and it's a tough question. I mean, including today for China Books Review, right? And I'll just say our central agency, which is kind of the BBC, has really kind of morphed the name of this review so that it doesn't say 中国文学评论, right? Because that would not fly for us. And in that sense, how do you separate yourself? It's only by kind of diversifying yourself, I think. Bringing in more voices saying this is also part of the Taiwanese consciousness. These stories are also part of our identity. And as such, if you don't have it, you can't claim that we are a part of you. You're not allowed to say that over there, but we can say it, and therefore we are different. And I think this book has certainly a lot of that, in that we can talk about our history very openly, we can criticize it, we can acknowledge where different elements are drawn from and how it has morphed to become something of its own. There's a lot in there about food that has evolved from its original Chinese version or original Japanese version. And you could say it's been hybridized or bastardized or whatever it is, but it's now Taiwanese and you can't get it anywhere else. Certainly not in New York, unfortunately. But yeah, I think it's sort of, if we're allowed to be expansive, we should expand, not in an empire sense, but in a embracing difference sense.
Being capacious and porous in our imagination.
Exactly.
And so before we throw it open to the audience, I do have one last question, which I have to ask. Do you have a favorite dish from the book? What is it?
I really like wintermelon tea, which I don't know if you can get here, actually. Maybe. You can try the bubble tea places. Please don't call it boba. That's my one plea.
Okay, questions.
I'll just take this chance while you're thinking of questions to do my thanks. So thank you for the China Books Review. Thank you, Alec, and thank you, Orville. Thank you to actually Ty Lee, who is not able to be here, but she's actually one of my best friends. It's a coincidence, but she booked my ticket to come here. And I just feel that there are so many people in this room. Stacey Mercer, who I don't know where you're sitting, but a veteran translator who I met at an event before I had any books coming out and is here today, and my teacher Jeremy Tang, who is of course shortlisted and is so prolific, and I owe it so much to you to have had a Mandarin-speaking teacher at Columbia to teach me translation, and the Taipei Cultural Center of New York, Director Zhang Huijing and Yang Qingwen, they're here. We've had so much support from TECO and from the Ministry of Culture to be able to do these things, and I'm very grateful. A lot of my former colleagues from Weatherhead are here as well, which is just kind of a funny crossover of worlds, but I guess I've been spreading my network in your policy realms for a while, and my publicist from Grey Wolf, Caitlin, is here. Thank you so much.
And I do think the care, graciousness, and generosity you just shown in giving your thanks is also reflected in your translation. So I really recommend everyone to read Taiwan Travelogue. Yes, questions?
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Ken from Yale Books with our boss and our team members. We are the only Asian bookstore in the DMV, and we are so honored to have the copies by the Yáng Shuāng-zǐ and also Edward Wong. And it was the bestseller of our bookstore, and we appreciate to be here. And I'm curious about like the topic about the Taiwan Travelogue, especially the two girls' stories, and combined with the history narratives of Taiwan. So how do you think the Taiwanese work can be present to the world? Like in this way, we know like the Taiwan is very open to the like LGBTQ, and like these two different things is the heavy history and use the light way to express the simple stories. So how do you think the essential part of the Taiwan Travelogue can make it very successful?
Thank you. Yeah, this is one of the reasons that I was drawn to the book at first, is because it wasn't a mournful history. Not saying it's a comedy, but it's in some ways, I guess it can be a comedy of manners. But it's very much trying to draw you in with this light premise and packaging something very, very cruel, right? Colonialism as everyday life. And I think it's when we look back at history, especially, you know, if you were conquered by somebody else, you were ruled by this alien force, it's easy to imagine that it was all just like misery every single day. Certainly a lot of films, I think, depicted that way. We're all just, you know, scraping for worms to eat by the dirt roadside. But in this, we see there was a lot of technology, there was a lot of luxury, there was a lot of fun that people were having. The power dynamics were, for so many people, applied in much more subtle ways than just pure abuse, which of course happened as well. But I think in this sense, it broadens the history to a larger audience, and ultimately that is the goal of historical fiction, right? To not only to educate, but also as a work of art to entertain or to delight. And I think Taiwan Travelogue and Shuāng-zǐ's oeuvre in general does that really well.
Hello. We talked a little bit, or you guys talked a little bit about taking extra efforts to, which maybe have made the reader suffer a little bit with the footnotes and using different names for the characters. Was there anything that you did specifically for the English readers, changes you made to the maybe the story or the way things were written, so that maybe Western readers would gravitate towards the story more?
Yeah, I should have to think a little bit about that. I don't think a lot about you people. I just do it my way. No, I think a lot of food and sort of the clothes or just specific nouns that were maybe written in Japanese. The way I kind of balanced the authenticity aspect was to kind of pull like an ATM machine for all of them, right? So there's the word as it's originally pronounced, and then there's some sort of English approximation of what the thing actually is. In translation, I guess we call it stealth glossing, which just means we stealthily sneak information to you. So there's a lot of that. There was also some cutting that was done, but I think that was largely a kind of a cultural difference between the Taiwanese and American publishing industries, where in Taiwan, the editor is more, in a way, more like a manager. They're like, you got to get it in, and then we got to get it out. Whereas in the US and the UK, there's a lot more editing, hands-on editing that goes on, rounds and rounds of it. And my editor, Yuka Yoashi, and I went through many rounds to cut the text or trim the text or adjust it as an English text. And if we were making really big changes, we asked Shuāng-zǐ for her permission. But a lot of the things on a line level, they were changed for flow, for comprehension for the English reader, for English grammatical structure, etc. So that actually comes up sometimes in Taiwan when I do events there. Like, why are these 8 characters missing? There are 90,000 other characters that are in there, though, you know?
Well, we could talk on forever, but I would encourage everyone to read Taiwan Travelogue and also its original Taiwan Manyoulu as well. And congratulations again, Lin King. It's really a monumental achievement.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lin. Thank you, Yangyang. We hope that all of you are enticed to read Taiwan Travelogue, to be stealth-glossed yourself, and to salivate over all of the dishes in it. Thank you to all of the winners and all of the authors of books honored this year. Thank you to the jury members who slogged through them, the publishers who put them out, and of course the readers who read them. Readers never get enough credit. We have, speaking of which, we have copies of both books at the front by the elevators if they haven't sold out already. So don't miss your chance to get yours signed. We now have a reception in the back. If you want to stick around and join us for a glass of wine or cranberry juice. There is also food in the far back room, not quite as tasty as bitter melon soup and all of the rest, but some dumplings, plenty of vegetarian options. We have the room until 9, so do stick around. We hope that today we've provided food for thought as well as food for the tummy. We wish you absorbing reads over the coming year. Nominations for the 2025 Baifang Schell Book Prize open in November. So we also look forward to awarding a new set of winners next year. For the time being, thank you for coming, and please join me in a final round of applause for the winners.